Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we are back to Norway for the rest of this week. And despite the speed with which the Germans attacked the country in April 1940, they did not acquire Norway's large or significant reserve of gold bullion. How that gold was smuggled out of the country from under the noses of the Reich is today's story with my guest, Robert Pearson. His book, Gold Run, is available in the links below, as always, or wherever you get your books. I'll bring him in. Now, we've been having a nice conversation about Ipswich Town Football Club, which most of you will be alienated by, but a few people will give a crap. But Robert, good evening. How are you today?
Thank you. It's good to be here. So yeah, very nice. Thank you.
So, as I said to you, I would always ask new guests how you like to define yourself in terms of your penmanship. Are you a military historian, a storyteller, researcher, academic? Do you have a label you like to use?
I start off as researcher, so I'd now say military historian. So I'm a retired teacher. So basically, I just now research and write up wartime history, mainly stories which are little known, and mainly.
And that's why, while you're here, because I was saying to you before going live, I've had a nice few emails from people in Norway thanking us for on the channel for highlighting some of the stories. Because in terms of how the way World War II stories have been mined for interest, Norway hasn't really been taken much by the big players. It's always Midway and Dam Busters and Market Garden. Yet this series has proven there are some amazing stories from Norway. So we'll launch straight into it. So folks, if you have questions for Robert, please do fire away. But I feel a lot of the questions will be answered as we go along, but I will save any ones that are pertinent. But I'm gonna hand over to Rob to take us through this. So over to you, sir.
Okay, good evening, everyone. And this is the story of the Norwegian gold transport from April to June 1940. I was first inspired by this author, the lady Dorothy Baden-Powell. She actually worked for SOE, for the Norwegian SOE during World War II. And she wrote a book called Pimpernel Gold, How Norway Fooled the Nazis. Now, I read this first back in the 1980s, and I was just hooked. And I read it several times over and over again. And eventually I met Dorothy, went to visit her in London, talk about the gold transport. And I always had the feeling that she was kind of holding back information. I think because she signed the Official Secrets Act, she still felt obliged not to tell the full story. Now, I knew from reading Pimpernel Gold, it was something you regard as faction. So it was like half fact, half fiction. And I resolved then, I thought, right, I'm going to try and find out the truth. At that point, I had no interest in writing a book. It was just to find out from the archives about the story of the Norwegian gold and how they got it out of Norway. So this sort of gives you some sort of background, really. This is HMS Cossack, corners the Altmark, and this is the prelude to the invasion of Norway in 1940. Now, this actually took place in February 1940, and as you can imagine, Hitler wasn't too impressed to think that the Altmark had been raided, and the British had got their prisoners of war back. Now, these prisoners of war, by the way, were the ones from the Graf Spee, and the Altmark was her service ship, and so when the Graf Spee sunk these merchant ships, the Altmark would then take the survivors and there'd be prisoners of war. Well, we got to hear about this, and obviously Churchill wasn't too pleased. They cornered Altmark in the fjord there, Jossing Fjord, and the prisoners were freed. Hitler went off on one, and that was the start of Operation Weserübung. He wanted to know about how they could invade Norway, which would be the most successful way. So this was like the kind of start. So I looked into this in quite some depth, and it was an interesting story just on its own. But my focus was on the gold.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so the German troops, we've sort of gone forward now, and the arrangements have been made. Britain had no idea what was going on at this particular point. This is the Hipper. These are the troops embarking on the Hipper. I mentioned the Hipper here because there were two gold transports. The second one is not so well known. The first one I've obviously been looking at, but the second one involved an American ship. But we'll come to that more in a minute. So here you see the troops embarking on the Hipper. I have to add, I bought an album full of German photographs and thinking, oh, I've done really well. I paid, it wasn't much. But I then found out that some of these photographs are standard photographs issued by the Germans to their, to their troops, and they would send them home. But this is one of many ways of troops embarking on the Hipper. There's another one. I just included this one just out of interest, really, the Wehrmacht, because it's just a nice silhouette version of the troops embarking for Norway. Destination Norway. So there were several groups. There's 1 to 5 groups. And then Group 5 was heading to Oslo. I don't know what ships these are. It's possibly the Hipper ahead there, but it gives you quite an idea of how rough the sea was at a particular time, and it's pretty horrendous. Britain at this point knew that the German fleet was at sea, and they were hunting for them. There's another version here of the Hipper at sea here. And this is particularly interesting because you can see that the troops are roped off. So they're obviously to allow the sailors, free access across the decks in case of emergencies, etc. But I included that one because it was just quite a nice shot. And again, you can see the North Sea is pretty rough. It gives you an idea of their station keeping as well, because you can see the ship just in front there.
Thank you.
Another one there, the troops relaxing prior to invasion. I don't know who these guys are. I'd imagine they're Wehrmacht or something similar. It was just a nice shot, really. So,
sorry, my internet disappeared for a second. Now I'm back now.
Okay, you want to go through it again?
No, everything's fine. I just lost the last second or two there. That was all. Don't know what happened there, but we're back, I think. Oh, yeah. Panic over.
Next one.
Yeah.
So these guys are relaxing prior to invasion. It's quite a nice intimate shot, really, of these guys dishing the beer out into their mugs. Lighting was obviously by storm lantern there. Not much else to say, really. I don't know what these troops are, what arm of the Wehrmacht, and I don't know which ship. That's possibly, again, the Hipper.
Thank you.
I included this one because it's almost ironic, really. It's similar to what's happening today. We seem to be going through what's happening in 1938 seems to be repeating itself over again. But this one is a cartoon by a chap called Clive Upton, and he essentially showing Germans here grabbing Norway and Denmark. So I just thought it was quite a nice shot. And I will say actually that it's worth for researchers and historians looking at these what we call cartoons or sketches inside these the World War II magazines like Illustrated London News, because I have found that some of these drawings are very accurate, and it seems to me that the sailors or airmen or soldiers coming back from wherever were interviewed by these journalists or these artists, and then they would then quickly sketch what these chaps had said. So it's definitely worth looking at and not just disregarding them as propaganda.
Brilliant, thank you.
Blücher, as seen from Emden, it's quite a nice shot here actually of Blücher going across there, and as we'll find out later on, her days here are numbered. Now the ships that are approaching Oslo, including Blücher, they're steaming up Oslo fjord. You've got to think that this scene would be at night and it's pitch black. The Norwegians know something's going on, and the lights have been taken out. Blücher, for whatever reason, takes the lead, and she should have been really screened by the escorting destroyers, or destroyers as we call them, or our boats. But she wasn't, and I think she wanted the pride of going into Oslo first. Well, she slipped up here because as she came in range of the cannons at Oscarsborg fort, she was in deep, deep trouble. So Colonel Berg Eriksson, who was commander of the fort, he'd lost contact with the outside world, so he was making decisions on his own. He knew that the ship that coming up the fjord wasn't British, although apparently there was loud hailers going off from the German ship with people appertaining to be British, but that wasn't the case at all. The guy, Eriksson, worked out quite quickly that these people were German. He waited for the Blücher to get level with his Krupp's cannons. Only 2 were working. Then he gave the order to fire. Now, the first shell hit the superstructure and set the hangars alight, and the field, aviation field was stacked all around the deck. That set that one off. And the second shot hit the director fire control tower. So now Blücher she couldn't fire back, or she could. She was very limited on what she could do. She was in big trouble at this point. And as she slipped forward a few more feet, she then came into range of the torpedo battery. Orders were given, and 2 white torpedoes, so 2 British torpedoes were fired and slammed straight. I mean, they couldn't miss. That's just point blank range. And then the Blücher was in big trouble at this point, started to slip over. And as you can see, there's boats in the water. These are Norwegians actually going to the aid of the German sailors here. But you can also see little dots, and these are German sailors in the water.
Wow.
So she was lost. That was it. Now, this is not a particularly great photograph. This is called a radio photograph. I'm not quite sure how it works, but it comes across as quite blurry, but it gives you some sort of idea. So these guys are survivors from Blücher. They've come ashore here, and they're trying to sort out the best they can, really. What we do know is that the destroyers, or the escorting ships behind the Blücher, thought that she had run into a minefield, so they turned back. So at this point, the invasion of Oslo had been stalled, and this was quite crucial because this gave time for the Norwegians to organise themselves to get the king out of Oslo and the government and the gold.
We had a comment coming from Stuart Burbridge, another guest on World War II TV. Given the damage that was inflicted on the Kriegsmarine in Norway, it seems incredible they even thought sea line was even slightly feasible. And that, that's one of those things that always gets talked about, is that the Germans were going to invade Britain and they could have been walking up Whitehall. Well, I think the Royal Navy says no, it wouldn't have happened. And I think Norway gives a little bit of insight into how, frankly, not very good the Germans were at large-scale amphibious operations and naval operations at that point in the war, in terms of landing people and getting to within a coastline.
Yeah. That's a good point from Stuart, actually, because they also got the Battle of Narvik, which happened April the 9th. It started then. There was 2 battles, obviously. And the Kriegsmarine were giving a mauling. And at that point, they never recovered from during the war.
Yeah.
So it's a good point from Stuart.
Thank you. But we continue.
So, yeah, these are troops landing at Fornebu. Fornebu is an airport, so it wasn't just a seaborne invasion. It was by air as well. So troops landing all over the place here. Starting to organise themselves. This is quite a nice shot, actually, because you can see the anxious look on the soldiers' faces as they sort of organise themselves, and they're about to take Fornebu Airport, and it was taken unopposed as well, unfortunately. Now, because Blücher had sunk and the invasion to Oslo had stalled, this gave enough time for Nikolai Rygg, who was the chief of the Bank of Norway. So he actually began to organise his transport pretty quickly. I have to point out here, Rygg had done the same as what Britain had done pre-1940 and sent their gold, or the majority of their gold holdings, to America and Canada. It's not known about that, but that's what actually happened. So what was left in Norway was just a mere 50 tons. I mean, 50 tons to us would be like, whoa, fantastic.
I wouldn't say no to 50 tons of gold myself, but yeah.
I wouldn't say no to £5 worth of gold, really.
Yeah.
But that's but yeah. So they just 50 tons was just left in the bank in Oslo. The chap on the right there, that's Frederick Hasland, and he was chosen by Nikolai Rygg to organise the transport. So yeah, we've seen troops disembarking. Now at this point, Rygg had got his act together. The bank had commandeered lorries and all sorts of stuff, and they were starting to load the gold up, literally as the troops were disembarking in Oslo. There were about 26 lorries, I think, in all. So they used bank workers, volunteers. They also had some soldiers who performed a ring of guard around the bank, just in case anyone came snooping. But essentially, they got all 26 lorries away just after the invasion. So this one, I'm not quite sure which ship this is, but again, it just shows them disembarking in Oslo.
Thank you.
And here we are. This makes me smile. Marching into Oslo. These guys had no idea. Most of these Austrian troops So they're from the mountains. But again, it's just a standard. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure where in Oslo this is. I mean, somebody may well know if they're from Norway. Anyway, these guys are just marching through Oslo. This is quite an interesting photograph here, because the Germans are marching down Karl Johan Gata, which is the main street. So you can see the palace in the background there, and you've got the university, which is on the right-hand side. And I think, I may be wrong, but I'm sure that the guy with the bicycle could well be Gunnar Sandsteby, who's the most famous resistance leader in Norway, led the Oslo gang. But I may stand to be corrected on that. I think it is him. But anyway, so these guys are marching down Karl Johan Gata, not realizing that the last lorry load of gold has just turned around the corner and heading out of Oslo. They had no idea at all that the Norwegians had worked this quick, and they just thought they'd just taken Oslo and that's it. And then they could take the gold whenever they wanted to, but it wasn't the case. So this was quite poignant, because this is the exact moment the last lorry load left. It just shows you how hard that the Norwegians worked to get their gold away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody may know who this chap is in the middle on the lectern there. I'm not sure who that is. He's obviously addressing the crowd. I know that the photograph has been clipped or cropped, and you just see the guys there, the young kids there listening to the Germans sprout off. This is outside Oslo University. Far right in the heavy overcoat is Quisling.
Right.
Quite a nice shot, really. So it just shows how close he was to the Germans, and he's got a front seat or front row. So.
Quick question for you, Rob.
Yep.
You know, we famously know that the Germans had drawn up quite extensive plans of who the people they were going to clobber if they invaded Britain, and where the industrial centres were, and where all the things like that were. Do we know if they'd done much of a recce of Norway in terms of, working out in advance? We know about the fish oil and stuff like that up in the top of the country, but in terms of things like gold and, I don't know, industrial diamonds or particular figures they wanted to clobber, do we know how much work they'd done in advance?
I don't know, but I do know Britain had done some work beforehand, so they were well informed of what was going on in Norway through spies and attachés and all sorts of stuff. And I imagine that the Germans would have been equally well informed. They certainly knew where the gold was, and they even had a special squad to go into Oslo to snatch the gold. That was all worked out beforehand.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we now know that that, as you said at the beginning, these photos are in a sense propaganda photos for the troops to send back to their families, saying, look at us marching through Norway. But we know how quickly they introduced their policies of internment and rounding up people they don't like and all that kind of stuff. So the parading up and down the streets is sort of a sideshow compared to the actual real work the Third Reich would be doing when they occupy a country of stripping it of its usable assets, I suppose. Yeah.
So here are J-52 transports heading to Norway. It's just a standard photograph, really, but I just included it because it was, it's quite a nice shot. Not much more to say about that than really they're obviously bringing troops in. There were some accidents, and some of the troop transports crashed and men were lost, mainly when they're coming into Fornebu. And there's a lovely shot, I haven't got it here, of 52 crashing into the airport, or at least up to the runway anyway. So it wasn't all, it didn't all go according to plan for the Germans. These are Norwegian prisoners here. You can see they've got ski goggles on. There may be some Norwegians on here who know more than what I do. I'm not quite sure where this picture was taken. It may be Narvik. I have no idea, but I included it because the Germans took quite a few prisoners early on. But it's just interesting to see them using ski goggles.
Yeah. And by the way, folks, we have a program with Catherine tomorrow talking about internment camps in Norway, particularly up in the Bergen area, that begin with Norwegian soldiers, then move later on to sort of Jewish people and other people who are undesirables, and indeed Soviet prisoners of war brought to Norway later on. So that's tomorrow on World War II TV. So a bit of a plug for that. But back to today.
Yeah. So by this time, the Germans have got themselves organised. and was starting out on the road to Lillehammer. The British response was slow, awkward. It was a bloody farce, quite frankly. But those soldiers and sailors involved were doing the best that they could possibly do. I mean, there's no criticism at all about how they tried to stop the Germans. But the Germans had air superiority, they had numbers, they had transport, etc., and we didn't have none of that, apart from the ships, obviously, bringing the troops in. But here we are, it's on the road to Lillehammer. And it's quite a good illustration here of how bad the road was for Lillehammer. Now, bearing in mind that the gold transport had passed this road, they've gone into Lillehammer Bank, and they've just dropped the gold off there, and then they're waiting for further orders to see what's going to happen. But these Germans are making slow progress up the road to Lillehammer, and they're meeting stiff resistance from Norwegian troops, who obviously can move around, and the British by this time had organised themselves and were meeting these German troops. But they were outnumbered and outgunned and all sorts of things, really. But at least they slowed the Germans down.
An interesting foreshadowing there of some of the problems that would befall the Germans in Barbarossa a year and a bit later. You know, single roads and mud and snow and all those icy conditions. It's all kind of on the cards there in Norway. Although it was, as you're going to be explaining, it is a successful occupation. There are these little echoes of how things will come back to bite them on the arse in future campaigns. Yeah,
and it's the same with the British, really. I mean, the British were poorly equipped for. I mean, it had been snowing. They didn't realize there was snow in Norway in April. So when they turned up, because they were poorly trained, poorly equipped, the French chasseurs, they had skis, etc., and snowshoes. But I mean, the British troops, you just feel for them, really. They're up against it. Only a few of them had leather jerkins, and it must have been, quite frankly, bloody freezing.
Yeah, I mean, they had some of those kind of uniforms designed for kind of sentries to use, but not kind of for mobile troops. Some of those big kind of heavy boots that would even the Russians use later on, but they were kind of meant for I don't know, Navy signalers standing on the decks of ships, not for infantry and engineers to move about on the battlefield. So the British got better with their uniforms, but 1940 is not a good advert for the quality of particular uniforms for particular climates. But same's happening in the Far East a year later, but that's another rabbit hole for another day.
Yeah. So this is a picture of the Gudbrandsdal. This is a valley, for want of a better expression. If you ever get the chance to go to Norway, it's stunning. It's a beautiful place to drive around. I mean, Norway is lovely anyway, but the valley is a beautiful place to drive around. There are quite a few cemeteries, World War II cemeteries, where you can pay your respects to the soldiers. And there's quite a few of those along the road. So this is the Gudbrandsdal Valley, and again they've come against resistance here. So the Germans have stopped. There's lots going on. I just noticed actually something to the left of the tank, but I can't quite make out what it is. It looks like some sort of car. But anyway, so the Germans are meeting resistance at this point. The resistance is quite limited, I have to say.
Thank you.
So we come to something called Midskogen and a chap called John Rogness. There's two things happening here, actually. So there's a chap called Hauptmann Spieler. I think he was the air attaché, and he'd landed at Fornebu, came to Oslo, and he had visions of grandeur, of capturing the king. Bearing in mind the king had left Oslo, and he's in the Gudbrandsdal Valley area, a place called Elverum. So Spiller took upon himself that he was going to capture the king, etc., and then he could bring about a conclusion to what was the battles that were going on. So him and about, I think, 70 German paratroopers in buses, lorries, etc., made their way towards Elverum. They came across a place called Midskogen, where the Norwegians had sent word out from Oslo that these Germans were on their way, and they must stop them at all costs. And so this chap here, John Rogness, along with another officer, formed a barrier quite high up in the mountains so they could actually fire down on the Germans. So when Spieler and his mob turned up, they got quite a pasting. Spieler was essentially, and all this is in a nutshell, by the way, Speeder was mortally wounded, and so the Germans then retreated back to Oslo, and the king was still free. I've always thought that if the king had been taken, that would have been it. Norway would have been finished, and they would have got the gold, etc., etc. So this guy, Rognus. Now, John Rognus was very friendly with Dorothy Baden-Powell, who I mentioned earlier. At that point, she was known as Dorothy Salverson, and she was the granddaughter of Theodore Salverson, who was the transport magnate. In turn, he was friends with the King of Norway, and Dorothy and the Crown Prince used to play together as children. So I think that the story that I read came via John Rognus, and he joined after Norway had been lost. He formed his own resistance group, and eventually he came to the attention of the British, who wanted him over here. So Charles Hambro wanted him over here. They brought him over here, and he joined SOE. And then he worked for SOE. He was a coordinator with SOE for some time. He died not long after the war, unfortunately. But yeah, he's quite a chap.
Brilliant.
So the gold had come to hit. It's not a particularly brilliant photograph, by the way. I do apologise. This is just a postcard, but I included it because it gives you some sort of understand the time period. There's no cars around, etc. So the gold was brought here and then taken into the vault. So all 26 lorries turned up. All the gold was taken off. And you can imagine just how heavy these things were. So we're looking at cases, and we're looking at barrels of gold. And two men had to lug these things off the lorries and then down into the vaults, and that was secured in there. The next photograph is a more up-to-date. Yeah, that's the one. So when I visited Norway to do some research on the gold, so we followed the path of the gold transport all the way from Oslo up to Lillehammer, and this was the shot of the bank. Unfortunately, it wasn't a bank when we turned up. It became something else. Whatever it was very secret because I wasn't even allowed in the front door. There was a buzzer. There was something going on there. I don't know what it was. I explained my research, etc. They weren't interested. You're not allowed to come in. End of story. So what was in there, I have no idea. But by this time, all the gold had gone, of course. I just wanted to include it because it's quite a nice modern picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So this chap, Nordahl Grieg. So Grieg, I suppose, is I give him the equivalent of being like Norway Shakespeare. He's just revered in Norway, this chap. Anyway, he was at the Theatre Cafe. As I relate his story, he was at the Theatre Cafe in Oslo with Gerd, who was then his fiancée, when a German officer raced in. This is on April the 9th, raced in and shouted, "Where's Quisling?" Grieg knew that the Germans had invaded and just quietly got up with his fiancée, and they left. Grieg then thought, "Oh, okay." Despite being a pacifist, he tried to join the Norwegian army. Unfortunately, he couldn't get anywhere. They were handing their arms in at this point. So he made his way eventually to Lillehammer, and he joined the gold transport at Lillehammer. So there we are, the picture of the railway station, 24th of April 1940. Right, so they knew they had to move the gold out because the Germans were slowly coming up towards Lillehammer. Bearing in mind they'd been beaten at Midskogen, so the Norwegians knew it was only a matter of time before the Germans turned up. So this is on the day the gold had moved out. So the railway station is only a few hundred yards from the bank, but there was no way that they could just put the stuff on carts and carry the stuff down. So it was all put back on lorries, driven off just a few hundred yards or a few hundred meters down to the railway station, then loaded onto the train. Had a special train laid on for them. As the next photograph shows, gives you a more modern. That's it. That's Lillehammer in happier times. And the station's hardly changed today. And I visited the place, and it's quite remarkable. You can visualize them taking the stuff through the station and then loading onto the train and away. And at this point, Grieg is with the Neutrality Guard, which is guarding the gold, and away the train goes.
And at this point, Rob, what level of urgency, if at all, have the Germans put on this? presumably they've kind of done an end of Kelly's Heroes moment where they've been into the original bank in Oslo, it's not there, and they realise it's gone. But
Yeah.
I mean, they're in the middle of attacking a country and occupying it, so they've got various things going on. I know you're going to get into the various bombings, things like that come up later on, but what's the level of priority have they put on it?
It's quite urgent, actually. They had no idea where it had gone. They just turned up the bank, and there it was, empty. No one was saying anything. They interrogated bank workers, all sorts, but no one would let on. There's no one from the railways that let on to what was going on. They had no idea at all. In fact, even after the gold had reached the UK, they still had no idea what happened to it. No one said anything. It was just amazing, really. Everyone kept quiet.
I mean, you're going to get to the rail aspect later on and the shipping and what have you, but Gary August asked kind of a pertinent question: is about there being the Norwegian plan to get the gold out. Is it a fixed plan, or are there plan A, plan B, plan C, depending on the situation that's going to happen around? Because if the Germans don't know what's happening in terms of the speed of occupying of Norway, the Norwegians don't know either. So presumably they have some sort of rabbits up adder they can pull out of hats if things don't go the immediate way they want it to.
Yeah, I mean, they had flown troops in. There were parachute troops that had gone in north of Lillehammer. So they were quite worried about that, meeting those troops. So the Germans had deployed paratroops in different places. But from what I can make out, and I may be mistaken, then maybe I was going to recommend 2 books for people to read. So the answers may be there. I don't think there was a plan B as such. That was. I think that the Germans thought this would be a walkover, like Denmark was. They just took Denmark and that was it, and they thought Norway would be the same, but it wasn't. You know, they fought back.
Okay, thank you. On we move.
Okay, so again, these are Norwegians being caught here. These look like neutrality guard soldiers. Again, I may be wrong, but someone from Norway may know better. But it's a kind of nice shot, really. Again, I'm not sure where this is because there's no snow on the ground. So maybe just outside Oslo, I don't know. But these guys are finished anyway. But I just included it because it's just not a good shot to show Norwegian prisoners of war.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before I move on, so I was going to say the 2 books are by Geir Hoff, so H-A-R-R, and it's The German Invasion of Norway and The Battle for Norway. Both books are exceptionally well researched, so people will find more details in them. So it's, I've been out a number of years now, but they're top quality books.
Okay, thank you.
So despite Romsdalshorn, so the train had made its way all up to Romsdalshorn, which is just outside Åndalsnes. And so you've got the railway station on the right here, and on the left, you've got a chap called Ove Voldsrud. So when I went to Norway, I interviewed this guy. He was 101, bedridden. He was quite difficult to understand because he had a very deep voice. He was telling me the story pretty much as I knew it until the very end. So I'll come to that bit in a minute. So the goal's taken to Romsdalshorn station. Åndalsnes is being pasted by the Germans, by the Luftwaffe, and they don't know what to do. They stay in Romsdalshorn because it's guarded by the mountains, and they knew that the Germans wouldn't fly between the mountains because it was just too dangerous for them. And you can see a mountain at the background there going off from the back of the station. So the goal was kept in a siding with the train by Romsdalshorn station. At this point, King Haakon turns up, and he meets this chap called Ove Voldsrud, who's a neutrality guard. So Ove was doing his piece, walking around the station, making sure there was no civilians nearby, etc., or any Germans. And he becomes on nodding acquaintances with the king, who's doing the same thing, walking around. He's quite a substantial chap, the king, very tall and elegant, had a distinctive walk. And Ove said he walked around. He said he just occasionally nodded to him. He said, and then all of a sudden, he said this man turned up, and he said he tried to make out he was Norwegian. He said he wasn't Norwegian. He said he's wearing a Norwegian jacket. He said, but I knew he wasn't Norwegian. He was probably German. He said I could see a bulge under his jacket. Anyway, he arrested him. The guys come round, arrested him, and they took off. He called it a battery-like object from his chest. So I assume this is some sort of shortwave radio. So I said to Ulva, so what happened to the German then? Did you know, where did he go? He went, what do you think? So they shot him. Now this story appears in Baden-Powell's book, but she calls him the man with the red hat. Ulva said he couldn't remember if the guy had a red hat or not. So that's where the faction comes in. So that was fact part of the story that I was able to prove that there was a German spy at Romsdalshorn station, and Ulva said they shot him. So that was the end of him. So the goal was still at the station at this point. So they got word to the British. So you kind of see Åndalsnes, which is just down the road from Romsdalshorn. Åndalsnes has got a fjord leading up to it, obviously. It's been pasted by the Germans during the daytime. At night, the Germans never flew at night. It's too dangerous. So any movements were made at night by the British, or at least during darkness. So you see Åndalsnes being pasted here. They were waiting for Galatea, HMS Galatea, to come in. She'd been ordered in by a chap called Captain Vian. Anyway, Galatea raced in. The guys at Romsdalshorn got the train together, got it into Åndalsnes, and despite the bombing, they managed to unload 200 boxes, and loaded onto the ship. And then Galatea raced out away from the bombing. So this gives you some sort of idea of the destruction of Åndalsnes. I mean, like most Norwegian towns, it's mainly wooden, and it was destroyed essentially. So this was again the bombing. The German troops here had found some trucks at Åndalsnes, and these were the same sort of trucks which actually carried the gold up to Åndalsnes. Now the Norwegians now had to get the majority of the gold that hadn't been taken by Galatea. They had to move it out of Åndalsnes. It was no good being there. So they had to load it again onto trucks, and it was taken to a place called Molde, which is just a few miles down the road. Again, it's serviced by a field. And this is Galatea. So you can see it's a light cruiser there. But so she carried 200 boxes of gold, and she took hers back to UK. It's all safely unloaded and then taken by train down to London and stored in the Bank of England. So this is Molde in happier times. Now I included this picture because you see the truck on the right hand side. That is probably a classic example of the style of trucks, lorries that they had at that time. So they were loading boxes and barrels of gold onto these trucks. So you can imagine they were badly overloaded. They lost a few trucks on the way, had to keep sort of swapping the trucks around to get the gold into Molde. But it gives you some sort of idea. So it's very different from what we see today with lorries. These were just small things. Actually, it reminds me of what was the American program we used to watch as kids? The Waltons. So it's like
the Waltons, yeah, it does a bit, yeah.
So like a Walton truck. In the background, you can see the church. It's quite a prominent landmark. It's been rebuilt since. But all the sailors I interviewed at Molde. So I went there to take part in the commemoration of HMS Glasgow. Every one of them said that the church had some sort of significance for them. That was what they saw when they came into Molde. The whole place was aflames, but they saw the church. So you can see Molde being attacked here. It's attacked throughout and being bombed remorselessly by the Germans. They had no idea that the gold was there, but there were British troops in Molde. The king was hiding up at the edge of the town, and he was just waiting for his moment to come down and then to escape on the ship. So you can see like the size of the conflagration going on there. Remorselessly. So this one here this is the building where some of the gold was stored for a time, stored in a vault. They managed to get it to Molde, stored it in the vault, and now they're waiting for the British to come in and to take the gold off. Again, the building's destroyed, but the gold was safe, obviously. See, the whole place is just a mess.
Got a question for you, Rob, about, if I was suddenly asked to unload something or drive a truck and it contained gold, or I was suspicious it contained gold, I want to just start talking about it. I know it's wartime. I know this is saving Norway's treasures and the king comes into the story as well, but I'm amazed that this is able to be kept quiet, because it's just the sort of thing you'd start kind of almost giggling about it, the excitement of it as well. So, the fact at this point, you've been making it clear they're doing it kind of with the Germans kind of breathing down their necks. There's the war going on, and yet it doesn't. The secret is being kept. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I've looked at it several times. I mean, all I know is that word never got out. They knew that, so the guys, so the volunteers who were on the trucks, not the bank workers. Oh, the bank workers were armed, by the way, with a pistol, which seemed was a waste of time, really. But the volunteers, the drivers, etc., they knew it was gold because the ones I interviewed said because it was marked N. The white boxes were marked NB, Norges Bank. So they knew that. Yeah, and because it was so damn heavy.
So heavy, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, as Gary said, that the trust in the manpower involved must have been immense. There's a whole trust that everybody is in this for the right reasons, and they won't just get excited about the cargo that they're shipping, because if you were just transporting, I don't know, papers or documents or something else, it would, but gold. I mean, how many pieces of art, how many poems, how many films have just been about the world's obsession with gold? It seems to just do things to human beings, and yet they're treating it like it's any other cargo that has to be taken out. It's an amazing story.
I mean, so I've spent many weeks in Norway, and I'd say Norwegians are not the most exciting people you'd ever come across. They're very, I wouldn't say they're dour, that's not the right word really, but they don't go around sprouting off. They're very humble people. And lovely people to be with, and very humble. And I can't imagine them, sprouting off about, oh look, there's a box of gold, this, etc., etc. So even the soldiers knew it was. I spoke to Over, and I said, "Did you realise it was gold?" He said, "Oh yeah." He said, "That was great." He said, "Crikey, that was heavy." He said, "But the boxes are marked NB." He said, "And we just did what we had to do, and that was it." And even the bank workers later on returned back to Oslo. They were interviewed, interrogated. No one said anything. They just didn't. The Germans had no idea. And I thought, for an operation that was off the cuff, it was an amazing success. I mean, I thought it was along with the Battle of Narvik, really, was the first allied, because I mean, Norway became allied to us, obviously, the first successes against the Germans during World War II. It's truly amazing. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Well, on we move.
Yeah, so the HMS Glasgow has been ordered in. So Captain Pregram, and he actually says in his notes, there was no need to use charts. They could see where Molde was, because you can see it ablaze here. Now, this photograph was taken by a sailor whose name I've sadly forgotten, because obviously they weren't allowed to take cameras aboard ships. But this guy took this photograph of Molde as Glasgow approached. So it's a beautiful shot. It's a bit grainy, and I've tried my best to improve it, but it gives you some sort of idea of what they're up against.
Brilliant, thank you.
So there's Glasgow from the side view there. So for those who don't know, Glasgow is almost it was one of the sister ships of HMS Belfast. So when I did my research about how they stowed the gold on Glasgow, Belfast was ideal, so I could just see how it was done. So not all the gold was, as we'll find out, was loaded. It was used by they used the cranes there to load some of the gold below, but some of it was kept on deck. But it's just a nice silhouette shot of HMS Glasgow. So Horace Grant. So as Glasgow pulls in, the place is ablaze, in huge conflagration, and the quays are light, etc., etc. So they have to play the ship's hoses onto the quayside to put the flames out. There's debris, it's muck, you can just imagine it's everywhere. The gangplanks go down, and they knew they had to get the gold on board. Some of the gold started turning up on trucks. Other gold was bought by a boat called Luftwaffe. We'll come back to that in a minute. But they were struggling to get the barrels up the gangplanks, as you can imagine. It was a pretty horrendous job. There's 2 men per box, 2 men per barrel, trying to lug these things on board. And Horace Grant, I met him. He was the last chap, last survivor of HMS Glasgow. And I interviewed him in the Isle of Wight, and had the pleasure and the honour of putting him forward for the King of Norway's War Medal. The King of Norway awarded HMS Glasgow, all the sailors on board there, and the Royal Marines were all awarded the King's Medal. For some reason, Horace didn't get his, so I put his name forward, and I was invited back to Isle of Wight, and the Norwegian, not the ambassador, he was a commander. Anyway, so the Norwegian Navy then presented Horace with his medal. Now, Horace's big thing in this was that he actually soaped the gangway with pus of soap. He said, because it's so damn hard with trying to struggle with these boxes. He said, I thought, if I soap the sides of the gangway, so we can just push up the boxes, and that's what they did, and that sped up the whole process. They could just use one man, push the box up the gangplank, and someone would lift it off at the top. So that
genius.
Oh yeah.
It's like one of those kind of problem-solving things you do at works. You know, how do you move 10 boxes from one side of a thing, and you soap up the deck of the ship to slide them. Yeah, clever.
And later in the war, it's worth pointing out actually. So he survived the war, obviously, and right at the very end, he said, we pulled into a port in Germany. He said it might have been Hamburg. He said, but there was this massive ship, and I think it was the Hipper. I can't be sure. He said there's this massive ship when it was flying the German flag. He said, so I raced to the stern. He said, and I ripped the flag down. He said, and I wrapped it around myself. And the flag now resides with his family in Australia. So the massive flag. So I think it's the Imperial German Navy flag as well, rather than the Nazi flag.
Wow.
So yeah.
Fantastic stuff.
Yeah, he was really worried that he'd get done and get charged, put on a charge for stealing this flag. He said, but it was worth it. So, yeah, and he's a lovely, lovely man. So again, we see Molde here is just being bombed remorselessly by HE 111s. The whole place in conflagration. So this is what Glasgow, this is what the sailors from Glasgow are seeing as they pulled alongside.
Wow.
Now, this church here, this is quite poignant, really, because when I went back to Molde to take part in the commemoration, and because all these sailors were there, so I could interview these guys, and I interviewed them separately because I didn't want to do it side by side in case they feed off each other's story. But each man said that they saw the church burning, and the one thing they wanted to go back to Molde was to see the church. And one guy said, so I left something behind in Molde. He said, and I had to go back for it. Oh, wow.
Wow.
But that's what they saw, and they all wanted to go back and see the church. And the church was obviously rebuilt, and they had a service there. So that was really quite special. Lovely moment. Yeah. So this ship, or a small boat really, she's got some of the gold on board, so it's loaded from Lagona and one or two others onto Glasgow. On board this one is the King of Norway. So it pulls up alongside Glasgow, and the King climbs up onto the bridge of this boat, and then onto Glasgow. So once he's on Glasgow, he's in safe territory. So him and the Crown Prince, and that's why I've included the Lagona. So they made it safely from where they were. And the top part of Molde had to come down, and then why they didn't come straight to Glasgow, I don't know. They went to this ship, and anyway, so she brought them to Glasgow.
We had a good couple of questions earlier on about how all this was coordinated. So Ian Carr asked about, was the escape of the royal family coordinated with the gold getting out? And Dennis asked, how did the Norwegians coordinate the gold shipment with the Brits? And yes, because there's lots of moving parts. There's ships on the coast. There's the movement across Norway, and then there's the royal family being moved as well. I mean, who was in charge of the master plan?
it got as far as Lillehammer, and the Norwegians weren't sure what to do, and then they managed to get in touch with the Brits, and then there was sort of, I wouldn't say a plan, the rough plans were made. Or if you can get your gold to Molde, we can get it out. If you can get it to Åndalsnes, we can get some out, etc., etc. So it was all ad hoc. And the Brits were in, as with the French, were in turmoil, trying to contain the Germans. So there was no promises made. They came up there. Was SOE involved? No, it wasn't. This was before SOE, slightly before SOE. But there was someone involved, and I've just forgotten his name. He was prominent with SIS. And he was in touch with the King of Norway and also with senior commander of Norwegian forces. So he was quite pivotal to what was going on at that point. But there were British troops in Norway, in Molde, and they were, once they knew Glasgow was coming in, then they could actually get the gold aboard.
Okay, thank you.
So this is quite a grainy shot of an HE-111 over Molde. So it's not particularly the best shot in the world, but again, it's taken from another plane by the pilot or co-pilot, perhaps. Just gives you some sort of idea of the attack. It was immense. So I'll give you this view of Glasgow. This was taken post-war, so you can see one of her turrets is now missing. They've taken it off. That gives you some sort of idea. So HE-111 came in to attack, and it came in quite low. Guns started firing off Glasgow, and there was a chap called Colour Sergeant Halford, and I think he was a Royal Marine, and he was on the starboard side of the ship, up near the bridge, and he deployed his gun. It was just a light machine gun, and he, as the plane came over, he just fired into the belly of the aircraft, and then kept firing until he'd run out of ammunition. He said the plane flew on, then all of a sudden there was this big orange glow in the sky. Some bits fell down into the field. I checked the German records. There's no German records of an HE-111 being shot down over Molde, but I've since learned that the German records are not particularly brilliant at that time. So it's likely that the ship was that the aircraft was shot down. I've included one here actually. There's another one lost at Akak, just to give you some sort of perspective, really. But when Glasgow was attacked by the 111, it was firing almost at mast height. Captain Pegram had enough and thought, right, that's it, we're off. And so not all of the gold was aboard. They had to leave what was left on the quayside, and Glasgow backed away and took the quayside with it. They didn't even have time to let go of the lines. So Glasgow backed away. And this has always been a bone of contention with the Norwegians, because all the Glasgow sailors said they've never been astern so fast in all their life for so long. The Norwegian historian said, no, it never happened. The Glasgow must have turned about and gone. But when you come into Molde in the field, there's skerries all about, and obviously the navigation officer would have been aware of those. And I don't think there's enough room to turn around a cruiser. So the idea was to back out, go astern, which she did, and she went full astern. From what I can make out from the logbook, from the ship's log, for 2 hours, and they were just using a chart and stopwatch. And I thought that's amazing seamanship by any stretch of the imagination. So, so Glasgow backed out. They got the king aboard. They got members of the government, Norwegian government, and they're starting to argue amongst themselves, as politicians do. And Pegram had enough and turned round to King Haakon and said, "Where do you want to go, sir?" And he said, "North." And Pegram said, "Well, north it is, sir." So he took him to North Norway to carry on the fight. And they were disembarked further up, him and the Crown Prince, and they carried on the fight. Now you see there's a screening destroyer in the background there. It's either Jackal or HMS Javelin, who were the two screening destroyers with HMS Glasgow. But it's quite a nice shot. It's quite a famous one of the King and the Crown Prince there. Okay.
We had a suggestion about who the SIS officer was at ENT. So was it Stuart Mingies?
Yeah, it's not Stuart Mingies. No, the damn name's gone from my head now.
Welcome to my world. Yeah. Someone will know. Yeah.
I can't remember what happened an hour ago.
Yeah,
So,
no.
but yeah, he's he lived in Stourbridge. This guy, I can tell you where he lived. Look, he lived in Stourbridge. Very famous chap, and he was known as A1 in SIS terms. So he was quite high up. This is almost indecipherable, but I can tell you this is a message sent from, a naval message sent from, or signal sent from Glasgow, from their king to our king in the UK. And I can read some of it. It says, "I thank you for your friendly message and sympathy, blah, blah, blah." So it's from one king to another. And I just wanted to include it. I found it in the archives. I thought, wow, that's amazing. You know,
That is amazing. Yeah. And all while you're saying this story, Rob, I'm thinking of those books that are so the general histories of the war, where they'll say something like, and the Germans swiftly took over Norway, or the Germans swiftly moved in Denmark, and you're realizing that when you're explaining about the firestorms in Molde and the this gold story and everything else, is that just sort of writing off the various German occupations in 1940 years. They did it pretty swiftly. It's never really cutting to the detail of the extraordinary stories they're part of it.
I mean, Denmark was taken in just in a few days, but Norway was something else. Yeah, and because I think they underestimated, like the British did, the actual terrain of Norway. I mean, it's so damn difficult. You can't police the place 24/7, and they found that out to their cost as the war progressed. But this was just a message from one king to another. So this is taken a few days after. It gives you some sort of idea of how much Molde was levelled, really. The fires are still burning there. Now, at this point, the gold was then put back onto some of the trucks, and they were taking the gold out of Molde and trying to head north, hoping that they could find the British up at Tromsø. So, and we're talking huge distances here. So I know we only got a few minutes, etc., but it gives you some sort of idea what they were doing. And again, so Grieg was all part of this transport. So he's almost followed the gold really from Oslo up north. Amazing chap. So some of the gold was put onto Driva, and so they used trucks and they used this particular ship, and it got so far up the fjord and then had problems, and then they had to beach the thing, and then the gold was taken off the ship and put onto some more trucks, and then they headed north once more. But I mean, it's a bit flippant, really. It's obviously a lot longer than this, but I'm just sort of trying to give you an overview of what happened, really. It's just an amazing story from start to finish, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
There was one chap who succumbed, unfortunately, and he was a bank worker, a chap called Sverre. And I visited his grave out of respect. And it was just shortly after they departed Molde. It seemed that he had some sort of seizure or maybe a heart attack, and he passed away. And this is his grave just outside Molde. I just wanted to include it, really, because there are lots of victims in war, and this guy was just a civilian, and cost him his life.
Yeah, thank you.
So Nordahl Grieg Centre here on one of the islands. So you could imagine Norway. It's not particularly easy place to drive. It is now, obviously, but not then. It gives you some sort of idea of the conditions that they're working in, and the houses, etc. But it's a picture of Nordahl Grieg Centre there in the middle of this, and the transport is still ongoing. They eventually get the gold onto 5 puffers. Puffers is another word for like a trawler, really, like a steamship. This was, after a while, this was reduced to 3, and this is one of them, Stolvag. And again, the gold was on board. I'm not quite sure who these people are or when this, probably post-war, I guess. But it gives you some sort of idea. They've had to load the gold on board, and it was stored down below, and the bank workers and soldiers were allowed up on deck. Only the sailors.
Wow.
There's another one there, Alfred, second one. And again, he says, took a lot of punishment these ships, and that one looks particularly rough, I must admit. So these are the puffers. They're now lying off Tromsø. Managed to get all the way up there with the gold. And I believe they're actually carrying gold at this point when this photograph was taken. and they're waiting for the British to come into Tromsø so they can offload their gold and onto the ship.
It's amazing to think that it might be on those boats at the time that photo's taken. I mean, you know, at any point the Germans could just, I don't know, sweep in with dive bombers or move in or surround that with some blockade it or something. It's, you know, it's one of those stories. If you made it into a film, you wouldn't believe it, would you? You know, it's that kind of story.
The puffers were a good thing to use, really, because they're quite innocuous.
Yeah,
they were just fishing vessels, and the Germans didn't see them as a threat at that particular time. Where they would have done with trucks or lorries, etc., etc. Think, oh, right, what's on board here? But with puffers, they were just fishing boats. So that was a good move by the Norwegians to get them onto the boats and then to get them, you know, up into Tromsø. So I just included this picture here because it gives you some sort of idea of what gold coins look like. So you had gold bars and gold coins, and there was a lot of them. I can't remember how many. I think it was 818 gold bars or something like that. But it was a lot. You're talking almost 50 tons worth. So it just gives you an idea of what we all know what gold bar looks like. It gives you an idea of what the coinage looked like at the time.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you.
Handful of those would be quite nice.
Yeah.
So they got the Tromsø. HMS Enterprise is there, and they load the gold aboard Enterprise. There's a bit of a struggle, but they brought the puffers alongside and used the cranes to load the gold up. And strangely, the gold just stays on board the ship. Enterprise doesn't move, and it's only a few days later that the call goes for the ship to leave harbour. Now it steams down. Well, I meant to tell you that the king is still fighting in the north.
Right.
It comes down to Tromsø. So Enterprise gets a command to go, and she steams out of the North Sea and then down through the Irish Channel, which is the Irish Sea, sorry, which is strange really because it was known there was U-boats lurking around in this particular area. But she went at full speed. Actually, at the 3 cruises, she's the only one who survived the war. The other 2 were later sunk. But she offloaded her gold. I'm just going to look here. Actually, she offloaded her gold at. Excuse me, I should do this. It's not at Portsmouth. What's in it? Not Portsmouth. It's anyway, it's in the Portsmouth area.
Right, Gosport.
Yeah, it could be Gosport. Yeah. So she offloads her gold down south. It's then trained up to London and then put into the Bank of England. Meanwhile, it's HMS Devonshire, so this is quite a formidable cruiser. So the King boards HMS Devonshire. Norway's finished, and Britain offers him, a home here, and him and the Crown Prince board Devonshire, and Devonshire makes her way back to UK, and she passes very close to where Glorious was sunk.
Right.
And she hears the distress signal. Now, in the official records, they say Devonshire never heard a thing. I met a woman whose father was a signalman on Devonshire, and he heard the signal and took it to the bridge, and he was asked to read the message out. Glorious was in trouble, etc., etc. And his words were that the captain didn't look at him; he stared straight out to sea, and he knew then they weren't going to stop. So he didn't know the king was on board, but as far as the British was concerned, they had to forsake Glorious, so she couldn't go to her aid. Not with the King of Norway on board.
Yeah.
Story there. So here we are, King Haakon in exile with his troop, looking at his people there. These are all Norwegians. He's exiled in London for a time, and then he meets some quite interesting people. And the guy I'm researching now, Patrick Dale Joe, had a personal audience with the king for his work at Narvik. So that's like an ongoing story at the moment. I just wanted to include that because it just shows you the King of Norway again on British soil.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
So the gold was eventually taken from the Bank of England. The destination was Canada and America. So this was one of the ships that's put onto quite a few ships. Obviously, 50 tons is quite a lot of gold. So it's put onto one of these was the Beaumont, which is obviously a Norwegian ship, taken across the Atlantic, and then say some of the gold was taken to Canada, and some of it was taken to America. The stuff that went to America went to the Federal Bank of New York, Federal Reserve Bank, and in Canada it was the Bank of Canada, which is modelled on the same lines as our bank, Bank of England, as is the Bank of Norway. So they're all very, very similar. The Bank of Canada were very open about the gold that they'd taken, and they gave me the registers of gold, the amounts, etc., etc. The Federal Reserve Bank refused to acknowledge that they received any gold at all from Norway, unfortunately. So these are two books I wrote. So sort of going back to Red Gula, which means save the gold. So I've written this story, and I had no plans to write the book, but I'd written all this stuff out, and because I didn't think I was good enough to be an author, I detailed typed all this stuff out, and I got invited to Molde to take part in the commemoration of the saving of the gold by HMS Glasgow, and I was given a hotel room at the Rica Hotel, which is like a huge sale. So those people who know Molde will know exactly what I mean. It's right by the quayside, so I can imagine all this going on from 1940. It's fantastic. But as a historian, to try and work it all out, I could see the scaries where Glasgow was, etc., etc. Brilliant. And the guy who'd invited me, a chap called Odvar Nuss, and he was very high up in the Royal Norwegian Navy. And he came to my hotel room, and I had all the stuff laid at my bed, and he was sort of flicking through the papers, and he turned to me and he said, "Bob, this has to be a book." He said, "We don't know any of this stuff, any of this story." He said, "Only what happened in Molde." So I shook hands. I said, "Right, well, I'll write the book." So I came back, wrote the book. Wasn't quite sure how to get it published. So I wrote to a few Norwegians, and one of them came back and said, "Oh, you need to contact this guy, Otto Samuelson in Oslo." So I wrote to him, and within half an hour he came back. He said, "Yeah, looks good. Can we meet in London?" So 2 weeks later, I met him on Westminster Bridge and shook hands. It was interesting because I came up from Westminster Station, and there was like thousands of Japanese and Chinese tourists, and I thought, "Oh God, I'll never see him amongst all this lot." And then this tall figure, the other side of the bridge, stuck his hand up, and I thought, that's him. So I ran across the road, shook hands. We went to the pub. I think it was called the Red Lion by Westminster. I hadn't even finished my Guinness. I got halfway through it, and he said, "I'll take it. I'll take the book." And that was it. And that's how it got published.
Wow.
A few years later, I had it published in English, titled Gold Run. And, so that's how it all came about, really.
Brilliant stuff. I mean, I'll put your last slide up there. So, as I said earlier, folks, you can buy Robert's book from wherever you buy your books, or there are links below. But we had a couple of questions, particularly about, you explained that some of the gold went to the USA, some went to Canada, but we've talked about on the channel a lot about the nations that then end up having a government in exile, and France did, and Norway did. About, was any of the gold used for the war effort as the war went on? Did it? Because you talked about the main reserve having been taken out before the invasion even happened. So Ian said, for example, was the Norwegian gold expended during World War II like the British gold reserves were in the USA?
Resounding no. The Norwegians paid their way throughout the war. In fact, I think they're the one allied nation actually paid their way through and didn't have to be looked after by the British. They could actually buy the Spitfires, they could buy their whatever they wanted. And it wasn't just the gold, they were using other means as well. But obviously the gold was there as a source, whereas we were using our gold, to purchase stuff from the Americans, and obviously we lost out big time. But yeah, it was so post-war, back in the 90s, I think it was, when the remaining gold came back from America and Canada, and it came back into Oslo, and then eventually it was put into they encased it. I went to the museum, and you walk through an archway of gold coins, absolutely fantastic. I thought, wow, you couldn't I couldn't steal. I couldn't steal any. I didn't steal any. But when Glasgow came into Greenock to offload her gold, one of the barrels had split, and this chap called Marine Saunders of ex-turret on Glasgow saw an opportunity and pocketed 1,000 coins. He then got leave, took the coins to Liverpool, and that was where he got caught. He served. I think he went to a pawnbroker's, and I think they thought, "Oh my God, you got all these coins, you know." So someone informed the police. Saunders was caught. He was given 3 months jankers in a prison, and when he came out, someone gave him the role of a job in the pay office.
Wow,
typical Navy humour, really. But yeah, so only 1,000 coins were stolen. So, and some of those coins remain missing today. I think 795 coins, something like that, were recovered. The rest were probably melted down, I guess.
Wow.
We'll never find them. And if anyone's interested, I've got years ago I actually bought. I can see it there.
No, you've got one. Yeah.
There's only one. There's not a thousand.
Well, one's better than none. Yeah.
It's just one gold coin, but yeah, fantastic story, and I just wish that when they done the film, they'd have done it justice. But there we go.
Well, one of the things I love about this channel is, by doing these shows live, is these little moments of things happen where people, you're telling the story, the viewers are listening, but Knut has been in the sidebar. My great grandfather captained one of the 2 fishing vessels carrying the gold from Foyer to Tromsø. So there we are. We have a connection there in the audience, someone who was involved in it, which is cool.
Just a shiver went down my spine there. So thanks, Knut, Ulla. Many thanks. That's great to hear. Yeah.
And please do get in touch with either me or Robert, and we'll get the 2 of you in touch there, because it's extraordinary. We had another. My last question is, obviously word got out because they used it for propaganda that the king and the royal family got out. So the Germans have an absolute Homer Simpson Dole moment when they realize that the royal family got out. But at what point are they told that the gold had been got out as well? Because that's that type of event that we talk a lot about. How does resistance start? What is resistance? Because it's a long time before liberation comes. But we talked about it with our Danish historian a couple of weeks ago about these seeds, these kernels of ideas. And it must have been very satisfying for the rest of Norway to know that despite the defeat, despite the occupation, they got one over on the Nazis in terms of the gold.
I don't think they knew it at the time. They certainly know about it now. And I look back on that and I think, well, how it was organised by Rig and the truckers and the bank workers and the Royal Navy and the volunteers, the railway workers. No one said anything. The Germans hadn't got a clue where the damn stuff had gone and never did find out. But during the 1940s, and I think this was set up by one of the Norwegian ministers, a lady called Marie McSwiggan, an American teacher, wrote a book called Snow Treasure.
Yeah,
it's essentially about kids getting the gold on sleds and taking it out of Norway. Well, because I think it's just a propaganda thing. It never happened. It could never happen. I mean, we'd struggle with a sled load of gold, let alone kids. But it's a great story. Unfortunately, some of the Americans thought it was true, and you have to sort of tell them it's not. But,
well, they made a movie about it with James Franciscus, as I recall, Snow Treasure.
I haven't watched it. Yeah,
it's not. Don't bother. It's not very good. Yeah. Well, we will leave it at that. But Robert, it's one of those stories that people have just been gripped by it, and it's. There's not much good news about 1940, 1941, even into 42. It's the Axis winning across the globe there, and it isn't a victory per se, but it's a glimmer of hope. It shows that the kind of things happen. I've been very gratified doing these shows when we've talked about the Shetland bus and the SOE and the freshmen and all those agents there, and Operation Reaper and things like that at the end of the war. Is that it's the seeds of what eventually would blossom in Norway to a very successful sort of resistance effort and defiant spirit that helped, frankly, keep all those thousands of Germans in Norway right at the end of the war, which helped in turn with the liberation of Europe. So it's a great foundational story. So Bob, it's been absolutely fantastic talking. Tomorrow, as I said, we're talking about the internment camps, so it's like the darker side of the 1940 era. And then we've got the Norwegian battalion on Friday. And Jane is joining me about her trip to the Lofoten area, because Jane is now part-time living in Norway. So I'm looking forward to that travel log program with her on Thursday. But in the meantime, thanks everybody for your questions. I will see you all again tomorrow. This is Paul Woodadge for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Bye.